Hello everybody, I'm in Lincolnton, North Carolina, which is a town that was literally built right on top of a battlefield, the Revolutionary War battlefield. Um, that battle was known as the Battle of Ramsour's Mill. In case you're wondering why there were so many battles back then fought near the mills, it's because that's where the people ground all their crops up into flour to make bread with. So that's where all the people were, so you need people to fight battles. Anyway, this was the scene of a little known but significant Revolutionary War battle. The reason I find it so interesting is because it was fought completely by militia on both sides. There were no regular uniformed soldiers there. It was all untrained militiamen. It was also fought completely by American colonists on both sides. It was not the Americans versus the British, it was the Americans versus the Americans. And so this really shows how the American War for Independence was actually a civil war here in the Carolinas. So for that reason, I'm actually going to refer to the pro-loyalist side as the Tories and the pro-independent side as the Whigs, because that's how they would have referred to themselves, and that's how they would have referred to each other. Here in the back, you can see what the big millstones looked like that they would have used to grind up their crops. So I'm sure it was a little more complicated than that. So anyway, come along and enjoy as I take a little walk through the woods here on the beautiful trail and tell you just a little bit about the Battle of Ramsour's Mill. All right, so just to give you a little bit of background, this battle took place on 20th of June, 1780. In May of 1780, a British army had just captured Charlestown in South Carolina, now known as Charleston, as a part of the Southern strategy, which was meant to bring the Southern colonies back under British control. So South Carolina, at least in theory, had fallen to the British. General Charles Cornwallis, a very aggressive and competent commander of the British forces, now looked to North Carolina with a mind to bring that colony back under British control. However, he knew that in order to do so, he would need the help of local loyalists. Luckily for him, there was a North Carolinian loyalist officer that was serving with him in Charleston, whose name was William Moore. He was a colonel. So Cornwallis sent Colonel Moore north to North Carolina in order to recruit as many loyalists as he could, but with the important instructions that he was under no circumstances to gather all of his recruits up into one place until the regular British army arrived on the scene. So Colonel Moore rode north to recruit for the King's cause in North Carolina. He was actually very successful in what is now Lincoln County. There was a heavy German-speaking population in Lincoln County, and the Germans tended to be more on the loyalist side during the American Revolution, at least in the South, probably because they had sworn oaths of loyalty to the king in order to be able to settle in the colonies. It was not just German speakers that he recruited. It was all kinds of people. Recruited about 1,300 men. A quarter of those men didn't have arms or didn't have weapons. You know, they had arms. But however, there were all sorts of people in his army of loyalists that he recruited, he decided to disobey General Cornwallis' orders. He gathered his army of about 1,300 men up into one place in a clearing, a lot like this one that was actually very close by. I can't take you there because there's a school built there now. But he probably made the decision to gather his men up together in response to news that a Whig army under Colonel Rutherford was headed his way to try and sabotage his recruiting efforts. But in any case, it was a smaller Whig army under the commander of Colonel Locke, which consisted of about 400 men that would actually hit him with a surprise attack on the morning of June 20th. Okay, so at 7 o'clock in the morning on June 20th, the Tories heard the sounds of gunshots coming from about 600 yards down the road to the east, where they had posted pickets. Pickets were just lookout men, scouts, who let the main army know when an enemy force was approaching. So they would have barely had time to get ready and load their muskets and array themselves into a battle line when they would have seen a force of Whig cavalrymen just barreling up the road towards them. Looks like they kept their nerve and waited until they were pretty close, about 50 yards away, and unleashed a devastating volley on them. A handful of the Whig cavalrymen fell, and the rest of the cavalrymen went into a retreat. However, before the Tories had time to celebrate their victory, they noticed a commotion just to the right of them. So it would have been a force of the main contingent of Whig infantrymen attacking them now from the south. And the Whig infantrymen were actually startled by the sound of the volley that the Loyalists had just fired at the cavalrymen. So both sides were pretty scared, and the Tories rearranged their line in order to meet the oncoming Whig infantrymen. The Whig infantrymen advanced, I would say probably haltingly, not really sure what they were doing, but being urged forward by their officers. Both sides formed crooked battle lines and started to fire at each other. However, it didn't really last very long. Soon the Whigs realized that they could not maintain their position, and they started to retreat down the hill, and the Tories were ordered to charge after them. Okay, so as I said, the Tories had the Whigs on the run, and they were charging after them. However, they must have realized that it didn't really do much good for them to charge because they didn't have any bayonets. Militia didn't have bayonets. So if they caught up to the Whigs, what were they going to do to them? They couldn't, do anything except for maybe hit them with the stocks of their muskets. So they fell short of catching up with them and began to once again form a line of fire and fire on them. The Whigs also started to form up, and they started to exchange volleys back and forth. This time, the fighting lasted about 30 minutes. With volley after volley, it would have been smoke everywhere. You wouldn't have been able to really see anything. After about 30 minutes, the Tory officers ordered their men to retreat, or maybe just to fall back. I'm not sure, and no one can really be sure. We don't have a lot of sources on this battle from the loyalist point of view. I kind of think that maybe it was a trick, a ruse, and in just a minute I'm going to tell you why. But yeah, so at this point it was the Tories that were falling back, and the Whigs were now charging after them. Behind me is a ridge, which, as far as I can tell, is where the Tories would have retreated to. I can't be sure, but based on the maps I've looked at, that's what I think. I can't go up there because there's a school there now. But it's a pretty sharp ridge, and it was back then too. And the reason I think that this was a ruse was because what the Tories did was they got just to the other side of the ridge and waited for the Whigs to come over the top of the hill. And they waited with muskets loaded, and as soon as those Whigs appeared head and shoulders over the top, over the crest of that ridge, they fired a volley and knocked a whole bunch of them down. And it seems to me like it was pretty well planned out. So now it was once again the Tories' chance to chase the Whigs down the hill, and so that's what they did. So the Tories chased the Whigs into a swamp, just like this one. And here the Whigs formed up into a line of battle, and the Tories did the same. And once again, they just started firing volleys at each other, pounding each other back and forth with volleys. And that went on for a while. Kind of a stalemate. But in any case, that was all about to change because something really unexpected happened. And a separate force of Whig militia, it might have been men that were held in reserve, but a company of Whig militia attacked the Tories from behind, very unexpectedly. And now the Tories were having to fight Whigs in front of them and Whigs behind them, all in the chaos of this swamp here. And it's a really difficult thing to form a double-facing line of fire, if that's even what it's called. But these guys were untrained militiamen. They didn't know how to do that. So effectively what happened was it just devolved into a hand-to-hand combat, just a violent free-for-all. You had people mainly fighting, clubbing each other to death with their muskets, beating each other to death with their fists. Just absolutely terrible. And that went on for a while. And remember, it was neighbor against neighbor, relative against relative. And as this was going on, some of the riflemen on either side began to kind of sneak off into the swamp and hide themselves behind trees and started to take pot shots at members of the other side. So the way that they were telling friend from foe was the Tories had pine branches tucked into their hats, and the Whigs actually had white, they called them cards, but they were pieces of paper actually attached to their hat. And so that probably was a pretty bad idea because they made great targets. So the Tory marksmen started to shoot at the white pieces of paper attached to the Whig militiamen's hats, and a lot of men got shot through the head. At the same time, a pair of Whig marksmen climbed up into a tree and started to fire at a Tory colonel. So this was not Colonel Moore, it was another colonel. I'm not sure what his name was, but one marksman fired and missed, and the other man fired and hit. And for some reason, when this colonel was hit, that was just kind of the straw that broke the camel's back, and all of the Tories began to just retreat in a very disorganized way. At first, the Whigs were reluctant to give chase to them seeing as how they had just done that, and it hadn't gone very well for them. But after a while, they did give chase to the Tories. A lot of the Tories swam across the pond and the river that were nearby. Most of them got away, but about 200 of them were captured by the Whigs. And at this point, the battle was pretty much over. It was a clear Whig victory. So the Battle of Ramsour Mill effectively discouraged any kind of loyalism from continuing in this part of North Carolina for the rest of the war. Colonel Moore was heavily criticized for making the decision to gather all of his men up in one place and expose them to attack the way that he did. I think it's interesting to note that that the loyalists who served at this battle, a few of them were hanged, but the vast majority of them were pardoned. And became very productive citizens of the community, stayed right where they were, and lived out the rest of their lives here. So I also think it's interesting that the town of Lincolnton was built right on top of the battlefield where so many people died. And I just think that's an interesting choice that the people of this area made to let that be the foundation for their town. There's actually a very prominently displayed grave of a loyalist here, and it has been restored in recent times. It was never damaged or vandalized, as far as I'm aware, and so yeah, there was respect for both sides because this was a civil war, and people understood that. But an interesting little anecdote that I read about this battle was that there was a man named Abraham Keene who had been a prominent loyalist at this battle, and he was commissioned to build a road in the newly christened Lincolnton in order to atone for his past loyalist activities. He was ordered to build this road along with a couple of Whigs who had also been at the battle. So that's what he had to do in order to be forgiven and be accepted back into the community. And that's what he did. So I think I just thought that would kind of be something interesting to share, and I guess that's where I'll leave it for today. Thanks for joining me today for my exploration of the Battle of Ramsour's Mill. It was a battle which was small in scale, but definitely big in its impact on the communities that were involved. So I would encourage anyone to have a look around. And it's a beautiful trail. I have to say, it feels enchanted around here. So if you do come, please be respectful. Please don't leave any trash, and make sure to enjoy while you're here. So yeah, if you like this video, do me a favor and like, subscribe, mash that bell button if you'd like to receive notifications about further videos. And make sure to check out my t-shirt website, expedition-tees.com. It's t-shirts for people who like exploring and adventuring like me, people who like hiking and camping, and if you like that, then you should give it a look. So anyway, this has been Backcountry Trails and Tales. Thanks again, and as always, take care.